Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a colder, older world. A world of roaring fjords, mossy cliffs, and warriors who wake up not with coffee, but with cold porridge and goat milk. You're about to spend the next few hours living a day in the stomach of a Viking. Not exactly glamorous, but surprisingly flavorful. You'll tread damp stone floors, blow on smoky bowls of stew, and crunch dried fish between your teeth as your boots sink into muddy turf. Oh, and spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive this diet. Between the foodborne parasites, the sour ale, and the random let's eat a heart vibes, your modern gut might not stand a chance. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fun to see who's joining in this cozy little time machine. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up before the sun does, because Vikings aren't big on sleeping in. Your bed's not much more than a wooden platform, fur pelts, and the ambient chill of a longhouse that leaks more air than it holds. Outside, a low fog clings to the fjord like a damp blanket, and gulls screech above as if they've got a vendetta against silence. Your stomach rumbles. Breakfast time. You shuffle into the hearth room, where a clay pot hangs from a blackened iron hook above a crackling fire. Inside, groat's porridge. That's crushed barley or oats boiled slowly in water or milk, if you're lucky enough to have a goat that gave some. It smells vaguely smoky, slightly sour, and a little like wet hay. You spoon it out with a chunk of wood that might once have been a ladle. The taste? Grainy, warm, and just bland enough to make you thankful you're alive. Sometimes, if your family's doing well, there's a knob of sheep cheese crumbling on the side, hard, salty, and sharp enough to kick your sinuses awake. You chew it slowly, staring into the fire, because chewing is the most exciting part of this meal. Next to you, someone dips a crust of flatbread into the porridge. It's dense, coarse, and made with a mixture of barley, rye, and whatever grain scraps were left over. That bread's been cooked on a griddle stone right over the flames, and it has a dark, nearly burnt crust. There's ash in it. That's not an accident. Historians still argue whether this bread was intentionally smoked for flavor or if Viking kitchens were just so smoky they couldn't help it. Either way, you crunch down, and it tastes like someone baked a rock in a barn. To drink? Buttermilk if you're on a farm, weak ale if you're anywhere else. Nobody trusts the water. Even in a land of snowmelt and streams, water's seen as sketchy, probably because it's often contaminated. So you sip a kind of beer that's closer to cereal tea than anything you'd find on tap today. It's low alcohol, just fermented enough to kill germs and give you a gentle morning buzz. You take another bite of porridge, scrape your spoon along the wooden bowl, and stare across the longhouse at the others. Everyone's chewing in near silence. Even the dog under the table looks unimpressed. Occasionally, there's something more exciting, like a dried apple slice, or on very good days, a dollop of honey. But let's not get carried away. This is the Viking age, not a bed and breakfast. You step outside and stretch under a dim sky, watching as a neighbor slaps dried fish against a rock to loosen the mold. It's like their version of brushing teeth. You make a mental note to snack on one later. You're full. Sort of, but not post-brunch in a cafe full. More like survived another morning full. Here's the quirky part. Archaeologists believe Vikings sometimes used porridge as an offering to house spirits, leaving bowls on the threshold to please unseen beings. So while you're eating your grainy breakfast, you're also wondering if some grumpy ghost is judging your table manners. You sling on your cloak, grab a walking stick, and start the trek out to tend the animals, haul firewood, or prep for whatever raiding or farming the day demands. The food might be basic, but it fuels you, warming your belly against the wind slicing through your wool tunic. And while you're out there, you remember last night's dinner rumor. Someone found foreign spices in a merchant ship's haul. Real cinnamon. Or was it cumin? It's a mystery, and no one knows how to use it anyway. Still, your mouth waters. Maybe one day your stew won't taste like boiled rock. But that's hours away. For now, your morning routine is porridge, cheese, and the occasional side of burnt bread. Not glamorous, but you'll take it over going hungry. Besides, you'll need the energy. Lunch is coming, And it's going to get weird. By midday, the fog has lifted just enough for the light to glint off your neighbor's axe, which he's using. Not to raid anyone today, but to split a sheep carcass. Lovely. You've been out for hours already, hauling water, chasing a stubborn goat that thinks it's a god, and fixing part of the roof with one hand while the other keeps a horned rooster from pecking your ankle. Now it's lunchtime, and your stomach has begun composing angry poetry in protest. You head back toward the longhouse, the smell of something iron-rich floating on the wind. That's not a metaphor. It smells like actual iron, metallic, tangy, a little terrifying. Today's meal is not your average ham sandwich. Laid out on the central table are blood pancakes, thin, fried flat cakes made with animal blood, usually pig or sheep, mixed with flour and a bit of fat. They're reddish brown, almost black around the edges, and they shimmer with grease in the firelight. You tear off a piece and take a bite. It's oddly satisfying, chewy, rich, and so dense with iron, it practically hums in your mouth. Not bad, honestly, if you ignore what it's made from. Next to the pancakes, boiled organ meats. Liver, heart, kidneys. If it came from the inside of something, it's fair game, and it's all served in a bowl of its own murky broth. The heart is especially prized. Firm, meaty, and symbolic. Vikings believed it gave strength. You pop a slice into your mouth and chew. It's earthy, a bit spongy. You pretend not to notice the slight crunch that might be a valve. Now, don't wrinkle your nose. Nothing goes to waste in the Viking kitchen. You don't throw out the organs. They're prized parts, full of nutrients, protein, and ancestral machismo. Your great-grandfather supposedly wrestled a bear after eating a raw kidney. Or at least, that's what your cousin swears. He also thinks elves live in his chimney, so grain of salt. Historians still argue whether these organ-heavy meals were everyday staples or more of a big deal kind of dish saved for feasts and butchering days. But archaeological remains show an awful lot of bones, rib cages, jawbones, and yes, hearts, left behind in midden heaps. And while the elite feasted on richer cuts, the everyday Viking often had to get creative with the rest. Blood pancakes, boiled tongues, and fried lard scraps weren't weird. They were survival, innovation, and maybe even a little luxury, depending on the day. To wash it down? A sour drink made from whey, called mysa. Imagine watered-down yogurt that someone forgot in a corner for a week, then decided to drink anyway. It's tangy, a little fizzy, and full of probiotics that would give your modern digestive system a field day. You sip it slowly, hoping it doesn't fight back. Across the table, a small pile of roasted bones is passed around, each with a thin strip of meat clinging to it. One of the older women cracks one open with a practiced flick and sucks the marrow straight out. You follow suit, using a spoon-shaped splinter. It's buttery, salty, and weirdly satisfying, kind of like bone jam. This isn't fast food. It's slow, intentional, and full of texture. Every bite feels like it matters. Because, well, it does. After the meal, you help scrape the scraps into a trough for the pigs, because in a few months, you'll be eating them too. Circle of life. Circle of lunch. Now here's the quirky bit. Some sagas mention people smoking animal bladders like sausage casings, stuffing them with chopped meat and barley. Think of it as the Viking version of hot dogs. If hot dogs were made from actual hot parts and packed into balloon-like sacks. Yum. You notice one of the kids gnawing on a dried sheep lung, puffed up and smoked over last week's fire. It crunches like a pork rind and smells faintly of firewood and whatever that sheep was thinking in its final moments. Lunch ends with a burp and a communal shrug. No dessert here, unless someone managed to sneak a spoonful of bog-preserved berries out of storage. They're tart, tiny, and covered in mossy residue that you pretend not to see. You lean back against the wall and stare at the beams overhead, wondering why every meal makes you feel like you've aged 5 years and grown a beard, even if you already had one. You reach for a piece of bark to pick your teeth. It's not a stick. It's a chewing twig, sometimes from birch or juniper, meant to clean your teeth and maybe even freshen your breath. Vikings didn't have toothbrushes, but they had ingenuity and sap. As the fire dims and shadows stretch across the room, someone pulls out a bone flute and plays a few notes. Not exactly background music, but it distracts you from the lingering taste of heart broth in your molars. Time to pack up a bit of dried fish for the road. Because next, you'll be traveling, and lunch on the go in the Viking world is another adventure. You cinch your cloak tighter against the cold wind whipping in off the fjord. The longhouse disappears behind you, its roof smoke trailing like a lazy ghost into the cloudy sky. You're off on a short journey, maybe to a nearby village, maybe to check on some sheep in the hills, or maybe to raid your enemies and make off with their silver and livestock. Whatever the reason, you need something to eat on the move, so you reach into the woolen pouch at your belt and pull out lunch: dried fish. It's not glamorous, it's not juicy, it's certainly not moist, but it is dependable. Tough, leathery, salty slabs of herring or cod, so dry they bend without breaking, like chewy fish bark. This stuff lasts forever. Well, almost. Let it get damp, and you might meet a new species of mold. You gnaw on a strip. It pulls like jerky, but flakes like paper. The taste is all salt, sea, and stubbornness. No spices. No sauce. Just preserved protein in its most primitive form. And oddly enough, it kind of grows on you, like a snack that's daring you to enjoy it. You chew as you walk, boots squishing through turf and your thoughts drifting to last week's journey, when someone brought fermented shark meat. That's right, hakarl, the infamous Icelandic delicacy. Not exactly your region's specialty, but trade and cultural exchange were real. Someone got the idea to bury a Greenland shark, let it rot for months, then eat it. Bold move. Historians still argue whether this was ever a widespread Viking snack or just a regional oddity turned legend. Either way, your mouth remembers and regrets. Today, though, it's the usual: dried fish and maybe, just maybe, a flatbread disc in your pack, baked hard as a shield and used like one if needed. The Vikings made these barley or rye journey breads, specifically to withstand days of rough travel. They don't crumble, they don't spoil, they just exist. Sometimes they're flavored with bits of onion or herbs. Usually, they're just flour, salt, and disappointment. You take a bite. It echoes in your skull. Still, it keeps your belly quiet and your hands free for other things, like fighting off wolves or arguing with that one guy in the back of your group who always thinks he knows a faster route. As you walk, the wind shifts and you catch a scent: smoke. Somewhere ahead, a campfire. You round the bend and find fellow travelers cooking a fish stew over the fire, adding dried herbs and throwing in strips of cured meat. The pot bubbles. You're invited to sit. You contribute your last dried fish, and someone tosses in a handful of crushed juniper berries. Now the stew smells earthy, sharp, and surprisingly good. It might actually taste like something more than seawater. Here's a fun tidbit. Some Viking stews were thickened with ground acorns, soaked to remove the bitterness. Acorn mush added texture and calories. You've tried it before. It's like oatmeal, if oatmeal hated you. As you dip your chunk of bread into the stew, you hear someone brag about a cousin who found peppercorns on a long voyage south. Actual pepper, not local herbs pretending to be pepper. Real spice. You raise an eyebrow, the others scoff. Historians still argue whether pepper was common in the Viking world or just the stuff of legend and lucky trade deals. Either way, you know it's not in this stew. You eat quietly, hunched over your bowl, the fire warming your knees. The stew is gritty, the broth a bit greasy, but it's warm and filling. And there's something comforting about eating food made by strangers who are probably related to you in some confusing cousin through marriage way. Afterwards, someone passes around smoked cheese, hard as a rock and smelling faintly of moss. You chip off a chunk and suck on it until it softens, enjoying the sharp tang and the way it scratches your tongue. You pack up what's left of your flatbread and wipe your hands on your cloak. Another traveler pulls out a drinking horn of weak ale, and you all take turns sipping. It's sour, warm, and mildly fizzy. Not exactly refreshing, but hey, hydration is hydration. As you walk again, you remember your childhood, watching your grandmother tie bundles of herbs and dried fish above the hearth, curing them for travel. She claimed that the fish would protect you from sea spirits if you carried it on your belt. You carry it anyway, just in case. Mid-afternoon sun breaks through the clouds. You pass by a field of stubbled rye and catch a glimpse of a man roasting a bird over a fire, turning it slowly on a spit. It smells like sage and smoke. You nod at him. He nods back. You both understand. Food is survival, but it's also peace routine and the closest thing this world has to comfort. By now, the sun's dipping again, and your stomach is already thinking about dinner. You can practically taste the stew before it's even made. But don't get too excited. There's a decent chance it'll involve root vegetables and more boiled things. Maybe even another boiled heart. The sun finally dips low enough to paint the fjord gold, and shadows stretch long across the grass as you make your way home. Smoke curls from longhouse rooftops, signaling one thing above all else: dinner. You push open the heavy wooden door and step inside. It's warm in here, filled with the rich scent of meat, herbs, and wood smoke, like someone tried to simmer winter itself into a stew. The central hearth is glowing, the flames licking lazily around a hanging iron pot that bubbles with something thick and hearty. You pull off your cloak and settle onto a fur-covered bench while a woman ladles out your share. Lamb stew, tonight's main event. Big chunks of fatty meat bob beside turnips and wild onions, and the surface glistens with droplets of golden fat. You cradle the wooden bowl in your hands and breathe it in. It smells earthy, warm, and vaguely animal. A good sign. You dip your carved spoon and take a bite. The broth clings thick to your lips. It's not spicy. Nothing in this world really is. But it's full of savor and salt, thanks to hours of slow boiling and a few dried herbs from the bundle hanging near the rafters. There's a bay-like leaf floating in it, probably angelica or celandine, two plants that grow like weeds in these parts and were tossed into everything from food to medicine. Around you, the longhouse hums. Families sit in clusters, hunched over bowls, trading gossip about crops, livestock, and the very important debate about whether someone actually saw a troll up near the ridge. Spoiler, probably not. But it doesn't matter. The story pairs well with stew. Next to your bowl is a roasted lamb shank, bone and all. The outer crust is crisp, blackened slightly from the fire, and the meat pulls apart with your fingers. No fork required. You chew with appreciation. This is the kind of meal people tell sagas about. Or, at least, the kind they complain about when they don't get it. Here's your mainstream fact of the night. Vikings didn't just eat meat when they were raiding or feasting. They kept livestock year-round. Sheep, pigs, goats, and cattle were essential to the Norse diet. But not every family could afford to slaughter regularly. So, a roasted lamb like this? That's a sign of success. Or possibly someone's birthday. Or a feast day. Or maybe a sheep just wandered too close to the fire. The reason is fuzzy. The meat is not. Next to you, someone tears into a bird leg. Duck or maybe goose. It's greasy and smells like marsh. They dip it into a sauce made from fermented whey and wild mustard seeds, an old family trick that adds a tart bite and makes everything taste just a little bit like sour cheese. There's also a pot of mashed peas, green-gray and lumpy, with a splash of animal fat stirred in. You scoop a spoonful and eat it like it's ice cream, if ice cream was gritty, planty, and deeply medieval. And of course, there's bread again. Always bread. This time, it's been baked flat against a hot rock, crust blackened by flame and ash. It crunches like toast, tastes like earth, and might contain traces of, well, whatever the stone had on it. You smear it with a clot of soft butter and pretend not to notice the occasional charred pebble. Midway through the meal, someone passes around a clay bowl of pickled cabbage, sharp, pungent, and still fizzing from the ferment. It's the Viking version of a digestive aid, though you're pretty sure your stomach needs counseling more than help at this point. A younger boy offers a wooden skewer of grilled liver cubes, daring you to eat them. You raise an eyebrow and take one anyway. It's rich, smoky, and melts in your mouth with a hint of something sweet, maybe dried berries, mashed into the marinade. It's the kind of creative cooking that reminds you Vikings weren't just eaters, they were experimenters. Now for the quirky bit. Some Norse households brewed broth from pine needles and moss, especially in winter when nutrients were scarce. It was bitter, greenish, and full of vitamin C. Accidental health food, Viking edition. You've tried it once. It tasted like forest floor tea. As the stew dwindles and the bones pile up, a dog lurks under the table, tail wagging with hope and low-level menace. Someone tosses him a rib. He catches it midair, barely a crunch. Good dog. You lean back, full for the first time all day. Your stomach feels like it's been lined with fur and ash and lamb fat. A warmth spreads through your limbs, not just from the fire, but from the simple, brutal comfort of a full belly in a cold land. One of the elders tells a joke about Thor losing a cooking contest to a giant, and everyone laughs too loudly, because that's what a firelit night and lamb stew do to you. Historians still argue whether Viking meals were mostly communal or often eaten in small family clusters. The sagas hint at both roaring feast halls and quiet suppers. Tonight, it feels like both at once laughter and silence sharing the same firelight. A horn of mead is passed around, more on that soon, and someone hums an old song about a sea serpent who liked to eat fishermen but never touched sheep. Odd priorities, but okay. Outside, the wind howls against the timber walls. Inside, you exhale slowly, a little grease on your chin, and let the firelight lull you into that post-dinner daze. You don't even mind that tomorrow it might just be boiled turnips again. For now, you feasted like a Viking. 5. Your eyes are half lidded from the stew-induced bliss when someone places a heavy horn of mead into your hands. It's sticky, warm, smells like a beehive took a nap in a barrel. You raise it to your lips, tip it carefully, and take a sip. Boom. Sweetness hits first. Then the bite, mild alcohol with a musky edge, like fermented flowers had a bad day and decided to cheer up. Mead is the drink of choice for celebrations, toasts, and yes, sometimes just surviving another Tuesday in a cold, wolf-haunted world. It's made from honey, water, and yeast, aged in barrels or clay jars, and it's about as close as the Vikings get to dessert. That said, you quickly realize you're not drinking this for flavor. You're drinking it because water is suspicious, and ale is often safer. And also because you can feel your back muscles trying to revolt from chopping firewood all afternoon. Vikings didn't have fancy drink menus, but they were savvy brewers. Besides mead, there's low-alcohol ale, like the watery stuff you had this morning, plus fruit wines, and even fermented milk or whey. Imagine sipping a tangy milk beer hybrid on a hot day. You probably wouldn't enjoy it, but you'd learn to fake it convincingly. Someone beside you lifts their horn and shouts something about Odin. Everyone cheers. You raise yours too, just in case he's listening. Here's your mainstream fact. Mead was central to Viking culture, not just for hydration or fun, but for ceremony. Oaths were sworn over it, alliances sealed. And yes, warriors got gloriously tipsy before battle, which, while dramatic, was maybe not the best military tactic. But hey, confidence counts. Across the hearth, someone produces a small jug of honeyed milk, warm and lightly spiced with herbs. It's soothing, like Viking bedtime tea. You cradle your horn of mead with one hand and the milk jug with the other, hedging your bets. Now comes the quirky bit. In some sagas, mead is credited with divine origins, brewed from the blood of wise beings and consumed by gods and poets to gain knowledge. You take another sip, pause, and wait for a revelation. Nothing. Just a sugar rush. You've heard stories about warriors who claim to have visions after 3 horns of mead, usually involving ravens talking about their personal hygiene. You're on your second horn, and all you're getting is mildly warm toes. Nearby, a group begins a drinking game involving riddles and exaggerated sagas. One guy insisting he once speared a whale from the shore using a stick sharpened with his teeth. You nod solemnly. Clearly a man of honor. Historians still argue whether mead was more common among the elite or widespread among everyday folk. Archaeological evidence shows mead residue in high-status graves, but some remnants in humble settlements too. So it might have been both special and casual, kind of like wine at weddings versus wine on a weeknight. The mead flows freely now, but you notice people pacing themselves. This isn't just a drink, it's fuel for singing, storytelling, and soft arguments about whether cows or goats give warmer milk. Important debates. The longhouse is glowing now, not just from firelight, but from the subtle haze of fermented honey. Someone starts plucking at a lyre in the corner. The melody is crooked and slow, like a lullaby for ships. Another jug goes around, this one of fruit mash wine, likely made from wild cherries or bilberries mashed and left to ferment in a skin pouch for a few days. It smells like someone stepped on a jam tart and forgot to clean up. It tastes surprisingly good. Tart, pulpy, and surprisingly lively for something that might be partially rotting. Now's the perfect time for a little snack. Someone unwraps a honey cake baked earlier in the coals and still warm. It's dense, sticky, and chewy. More bread than cake, but sweet enough to feel luxurious. You break off a chunk, let it melt on your tongue, and realize you haven't had anything this sugary in weeks, maybe months. You glance around the longhouse. People are nodding off by the fire, their horns loosely gripped, conversation softening. A dog sighs in its sleep. Someone hums the same melody again, slightly off key, but no one minds. This is Viking comfort: fire, food, drink, and company. Outside, the wind howls again. Inside, the mead glows in your chest like kindling. You sip the last of it slowly, savoring the quiet. This isn't a feast anymore. It's a ritual, a soft descent into the night. You set your horn aside and pull the fur around your shoulders. The fire pops. A bit of fat crackles in the stew pot. The night stretches wide and peaceful. And just before you close your eyes, someone whispers a riddle that makes no sense at all, but somehow feels important. You'll try to remember it tomorrow. You wake up with your cheek pressed against a fur pelt, a dull throb in your head, and a mouth that feels like you've been chewing on a wool sock all night. Congratulations, you've met your first proper mead hangover. Welcome to the Viking morning after experience. There's no coffee, no ibuprofen, no greasy bacon to save you, but there is breakfast. And with it, a strange sort of cure passed down through generations. Bread and broth, maybe a little sour goat milk if you're feeling brave. You sit up slowly, the embers in the hearth glowing faintly, and reach for the flatbread left on the side table. It's cold, hard, slightly smoky, possibly left there since yesterday. You chew it anyway, and it crunches like regret. This is no modern artisan sourdough. Viking bread was barely risen, often stone-cooked and full of grit. No, really, grit. Because milling stones weren't perfect, and bits of rock dust ended up in the flour. That means your breakfast comes with a side of tooth erosion. Ancient dental records don't lie. Viking teeth wore down faster than their axes. You gnaw thoughtfully, staring into the fire, trying to remember how many horns of mead you actually drank. Too many, based on how your stomach is now reconsidering the concept of solids. Still, this bread is survival food. It's made of barley, rye, sometimes oat, and occasionally bolstered with pea flour, or the powdered remnants of whatever else was lying around. It's the Viking version of fridge clean-out day. Historians still argue whether yeast was used in daily Viking baking. Some believe spontaneous fermentation from wild yeasts was common. Others think most breads were flat, fast, and vaguely brick-like. Given the current bread in your hand is nearly as hard as your belt buckle, you're inclined to believe the latter. Next to the hearth, someone is stirring a small pot of gruel, a watered-down porridge made with leftover grain, sometimes thinned with whey or broth. It's warm, beige, and unenthusiastic, like it knows it's only being eaten because you're too hungover to chew. You slurp a spoonful. It slides down without resistance, settling like a warm pebble in your stomach. And here's a curious tidbit. Bread wasn't just food, it was status. The darker and coarser it was, the more everyday it was. Fine, white bread was for the elite, made with imported wheat, which was rare and costly in the Norse world. So while your current meal might not be exciting, it's at least egalitarian. You and your neighbor are both eating rock-dusted rye crackers. Someone nearby breaks out a fresh flat cake, still warm, thinner than usual, and smeared with animal fat and crushed garlic. You trade them a bit of cheese for a bite. It's pungent, oily, and just intense enough to jolt your senses back into motion. Garlic isn't native here, but it's traded from the south, and some Viking cooks prize it for both flavor and folk medicine magic. You lean against a beam and close your eyes. Outside, the day is already moving. Animals bleating, tools clanging, someone shouting about a broken cartwheel. You don't care. You're still trying to survive this bread. Here comes the quirky bit. Some households use tree bark, usually pine or birch, ground into flour during lean times. Called bark bread, it was exactly what it sounds like. Technically edible, desperately fibrous, and known to cause digestion issues. You've had it once. Once was enough. And yet, it gets worse. In famine years, some recipes used moss or lichen to stretch out flour. They boiled it, dried it, crushed it, mixed it into dough. The texture? Imagine chewing a sponge that's mad at you. You reach for your ale cup from last night, hoping for a sip of water. Nope. It's still ale. Warm, flat, and slightly vinegary. But at least it's safer than the stream out back, where the pigs keep bathing. You finish the last of your bread and let out a low sigh. Your jaw aches from chewing. Your stomach is holding its own. That's a win. And if you're feeling lucky, there's a loaf in the corner someone made with hazelnuts and dried berries, more for feast days than recovery mornings, but still within reach. You take a small piece, It's sweet, chewy, and almost makes you forget your teeth are slowly sanding themselves down. Back in the day, some Viking bakers carved patterns into their bread loaves, mostly symbolic. Runes for protection, maybe a spiral for good harvest. You once saw one shaped like Thor's hammer. Cute. This one has a thumbprint. As you wipe your hands on your tunic and rise from the bench, you feel more human again. Slightly bruised, but ready. You glance toward the coals. A neighbor's already mixing grain in a bowl, eyes half open, prepping the next batch. Because in Viking life, there's no such thing as a day without bread. The sun is finally up for real now, peeking over the treetops and spilling pale light across the longhouse floor. It's time to step outside and get your hands dirty, because for most Vikings, food doesn't come from markets. It comes from the land, your animals, and a whole lot of manual labor. Today, you're spending the day at a farmstead, one of thousands scattered across the Norse world. These aren't tidy little plots with white fences. They're practical, scrappy operations where every square of soil has been argued over by humans, goats, and the occasional overly confident goose. You walk out past a cluster of wooden pens where sheep mill around like fuzzy complaints. The air smells like wool, manure, and a little bit of cabbage. Someone's already started digging up turnips, pulling them from the ground with satisfying squelches. They're streaked with mud, misshapen, and frankly, a little ugly. Perfect. Turnips are one of the staple vegetables in your world, alongside leeks, cabbages, onions, and beans. Root crops do well in this climate, especially since they don't mind cold nights or long stretches of grumpy weather. You grab a basket and help harvest, the soil damp between your fingers, the turnips heavy and solid. Back inside, someone is slicing leeks into a clay bowl. They're sharp and oniony, with a smell that sticks to your hands for days. You add them to a pot of boiling water, toss in a few dried peas, a spoonful of animal fat, and a whole turnip. Lunch is on its way. You glance over at the dairy shelf. Well, it's really a cool corner with some half-buried clay jars. And spot clabbered milk. That's milk that's been left out to curdle naturally, forming a thick, sour mass that can be eaten plain, mixed into stews, or churned into soft cheese. You take a small spoonful. It's tangy, creamy, and faintly smells of whetstone and goat. Cheese here isn't aged in tidy wheels with red wax. It's slapped together from raw milk and rennet, sometimes scraped from a calf's stomach, and drained in woven baskets. The result? Lumpy, soft, and occasionally squeaky when you chew it. You eat it anyway, because it's calcium and calories, and you need both to survive a Viking workday. Here's your historical fact. Most Viking farmsteads were self-sustaining. What? Meaning families produced nearly everything they ate, from meat and milk to vegetables and grains. The average Norseman wasn't a pillaging warrior. He was a hard-working farmer with a strong back and a permanent tan line from hauling firewood. You haul a bucket to the pig pen and dump some food scraps, cabbage leaves, turnip peels, maybe a bit of boiled barley. The pigs snort with enthusiasm. You pat one on the back and tell him he's doing great. He has no idea he's next month's stew. Then there are the chickens, scraggly, noisy, and shockingly fast when you're trying to catch one. Their eggs are a rare treat, especially in winter. You find 2 in the coop, still warm. They'll probably be poached later, or boiled until the yolk turns gray, then mashed with herbs and smeared on bread. You grab a wooden bowl of fermented vegetable mash, a tangy mix of cabbage, herbs, and turnips that's been stewing in its own juices for a week or more. Fermentation is key in Viking kitchens. It's preservation, yes, but it's also flavor. That sour snap wakes up a bland dish, and it wakes up your sinuses too. Quirky fact time. Vikings sometimes used ashes in food prep, especially when soaking beans or preserving meat. Ash added alkaline minerals and may have helped prevent spoilage, or maybe just gave everything a gritty, earthy undertone. You've eaten stew with ash before. It tasted like regret and firewood. The debate among historians, whether Viking diets were high in vegetables or more meat-focused. Some argue the elite enjoyed meat-heavy meals, while the average farmer ate mostly legumes, roots, and dairy, with meat reserved for special occasions or when an animal got too old to be useful. Your personal experience? A lot more peas than pork. You grab a stone bowl of bean mash, stir in a splash of goat's milk, and spread it on a hot stone bread. It's warm, savory, and just textured enough to keep you chewing. This is real Viking nourishment, not fancy, but filling. Someone hands you a boiled cabbage leaf wrapped around barley, tied with a sprig of thyme. It's like a rustic Viking cabbage roll. You eat it in 2 bites and chase it with a gulp of sour whey, the cloudy leftover liquid from cheese making. It tastes faintly of salt, sheep, and sadness. But hey, it's packed with protein, and you're not exactly swimming in beverage options. By midday, your arms ache from pulling roots and your hands are stiff from the cold. You sit down on a mossy stone and look out over the farmstead. Chickens peck around your boots, sheep huddle near a low fence, and someone's yelling at a cow who clearly has no plans to be milked today. It's chaotic, muddy, and smells deeply alive. You break a chunk off a hard, flat barley biscuit, dense enough to stop a spear, and probably used for that at some point, and chew it slowly. There's a surprising sweetness from dried berries baked inside, maybe lingonberries or bilberries, collected from the woods and dried above the hearth. You didn't think this meal would have dessert, but here it is, a grainy, rock-like puck with a heart of fruit. As evening creeps in, the cooking fire is stoked again. More root stew, maybe with bits of dried lamb if you're lucky. You're handed a wooden spoon and eat straight from the shared pot. Everyone smells like smoke and damp wool, but no one cares. The food is hot, the night is quiet, and you're full. As you drift into a food coma beside the hearth, belly warm with barley and turnip, you reflect on the strange richness of this seemingly simple life. It's easy to overlook the dignity in digging leeks or fermenting cabbage. But here, survival is an art, and every cracked bowl of clabbered milk is part of a long, unbroken thread stretching back through Viking time. You wake up to the clatter of something distinctly un-Viking. A small cloth-wrapped bundle being unwrapped by a wiry trader who smells like sea salt and camels. The bundle reveals something brownish, flaky, and intensely aromatic. You lean in closer. It's cumin. Real cumin, shipped from the east by way of a trade route that passes through more hands than you can count, and eventually winds its way all the way up here to this farmstead on the edge of a fjord. And just like that, dinner is about to get a whole lot more interesting. See, despite their rugged image, the Vikings weren't culinary hermits. They were extremely active traders, sailing not only west to plunder monasteries, but also south and east to barter, swap, and sample. Viking ships reached Constantinople, the Middle East, even parts of Central Asia. And while they didn't come back with silk robes and golden thrones, though sometimes they did, they definitely came back with flavor. Tonight, you're tasting one of those flavors in a goat stew that simmers over a low flame. Alongside the usual barley and turnips, someone's tossed in a generous pinch of imported cumin, its warm, nutty scent transforming the otherwise bland broth into something cozy and vaguely exotic. Your historical fact: archaeological finds at Viking sites in Scandinavia have revealed spices like black pepper, coriander, and even cinnamon. These were rare, expensive, and definitely not found in every home, but their presence tells us that at least some Viking cooks knew how to elevate a stew. The quirky twist? There's a Viking recipe for a wine sauce with onions and almonds, which suggests someone, somewhere, was throwing together the medieval version of a reduction. Historians still argue whether this was a common dish among elites or a one-off luxury dinner for some overachieving chieftain trying to impress a Frankish diplomat. You spoon up a bite of the cumin stew and let the flavors roll over your tongue. There's the earthy barley, the sweetness of cooked root veg, and then, pow, that peppery edge of spice that makes your taste buds sit up like startled goats. This isn't your usual Viking peasant food. This is dinner with a passport. Nearby, a woman is crushing dried wild herbs with a smooth stone, thyme, yarrow, and wild garlic. The smell fills the room, green and sharp and wonderfully alive. Not all flavor has to come from far away. Sometimes it's growing just outside the fence. You're handed a slab of roasted venison, crusted with salt and what might be fennel seeds. The meat is gamey and rich, streaked with fat and slightly burnt at the edges. You chew slowly, savoring the savory oils and wood smoke. Meat like this isn't eaten every day. It's a treat, maybe caught in a recent hunt or brought back from a feast. And then, another surprise. Someone uncorks a clay jar of imported wine. It's thick, syrupy, and probably closer to vinegar than anything you'd buy at a supermarket, but you sip it with reverence. This bottle may have come all the way from southern Europe, possibly Gaul, maybe even Italy, and it tastes like warm stone and plum skins. You watch as the trader pulls out a tiny pouch of dried saffron threads. Yes, saffron! It's barely the size of your palm, but probably worth a goat or two. He sprinkles a few wisps into a pan of oats simmering with milk. The color changes from pale gray to brilliant gold. The smell is earthy, buttery, a little floral. You suddenly feel like you're eating dessert in Byzantium. Quirky tidbit alert. Walrus ivory, Arctic fox pelts, and even enslaved people were traded in exchange for spices. That means the pinch of cinnamon in your bowl might have cost someone a 6-month voyage, a near-death experience, or something darker. Trade wasn't always fair or safe, but it was constant, and it shaped the Viking palate more than most people realize. A debate still swirls among scholars. How widely were these spices and imports used? Were they confined to the halls of jarls and kings, or did some make their way down to average folk through second-hand trade and black market barter? It's hard to know for sure, but you're sitting here, eating cumin stew beside a leather-clad farmer who can't write his own name, so clearly these things got around. After the stew, a honey-dipped barley cake is passed around. It's spiced with what might be cardamom, and its warm sweetness clings to your fingers. You eat it in 2 bites and wipe your hands on your tunic, wondering how much of this food would have surprised even other Vikings. As night falls, the smells of spice and meat cling to the wooden beams above. You wrap a wool cloak around your shoulders and lean back on a fur-covered bench, your stomach full of flavors that came from across oceans, deserts, and empires. And here you are, a Viking for the day, licking cumin from your lips and wondering what tomorrow's stew might bring. It's the dead of winter now, and your world has shrunk to the 4 walls of a longhouse that creaks and groans in the icy wind like it's about to spill its secrets. Outside, everything is locked in snow, the fjord is half frozen, and the goats look like they're reconsidering all their life choices. For you, like for any Viking in January, survival comes down to one question. What did you manage to store back in autumn? The food you eat now isn't fresh. It's not crisp, juicy, or bright. It's preserved, fermented, dried, salted, smoked, buried, or brined, and sometimes a mysterious combination of several of those. This is the Viking pantry in full swing. And yes, you're going to smell it before you see it. This morning, you're served hakarl, fermented shark meat. Well, technically, it's more Greenlandic than Norse, but the Vikings absolutely encountered it. It's been buried in the ground for months, then hung up to dry, and it smells, how do we say this nicely, like a urinal in a fish market. But you eat it anyway, because it's got protein, and your options are otherwise limited to pickled turnips and maybe some leathery dried apples from last harvest. Fact of the day, Vikings were preservation masters. They salted fish, dried berries, smoked meat, and even brewed drinks that doubled as nutritional backups. Grains were stored in underground pits, sometimes sealed with clay or turf to keep rodents and moisture out. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Now for the quirky gem. There's evidence that Vikings sometimes pickled eggs in whey, a dairy-based brine that left them sour and rubbery. Not exactly Michelin-starred, but undeniably effective. Some even argue they fermented everything they could, from cabbage to onions, turning their longhouses into unintentional probiotic temples. You pull out a wooden jar from the pantry's darkest shelf. Inside? Lutefisk. Yes, the notorious dried whitefish soaked in lye until it becomes something between jelly and soap. Modern Scandinavians still eat it today, often with a pinch of nostalgia and a lot of butter. Back then, though, it was a clever way to preserve fish through the bitterest months. Historians still argue whether these extreme preservation methods were widespread across all settlements or more common in coastal communities with higher fishing yields. Some say the inland farmers mostly relied on root cellars, where beets, carrots, and onions could last all winter with a little sawdust and a lot of patience. Others claim fermentation was a cultural cornerstone across the Viking world. You sit by the fire chewing on a slice of smoked lamb, hard as driftwood, but still releasing a deep, savory aroma. It's been cured with sea salt and juniper berries, then hung in the rafters to smoke for weeks. Each bite is a time capsule of late autumn labor, when the animals were slaughtered just before winter, not out of cruelty, but because there wasn't enough fodder to feed them all. And of course, there's drink. You warm your hands around a clay cup of weak mead, probably brewed with leftover honeycombs and boiled herbs. It's sweet, slightly fizzy, and vaguely suspicious. You sip slowly, thankful for the warmth and the slight buzz. The longhouse is stuffy, rank with smoke and sour dairy, but also cozy in its own strange way. Someone's unwrapping a wheel of aged cheese, crusted with ash and herbs. It smells like a damp cave, tastes like salted hay, and crumbles beautifully over a chunk of hard rye bread. Cheese like this doesn't just happen. It takes months of careful tending, flipping, rubbing, watching for mold. It's not just food, it's patience distilled. A teenage boy passes you a strip of dried apple, leathery but still sweet. These were sliced and strung up on twine back in September, hanging in the sun like bunting. There's pride in his voice when he says, "Still good, huh?" You nod. Still good. Quirky detail. Some Viking Age households likely had smoke chambers above the hearth, basically designated smoking shelves where fish and meat could dangle in the rising heat. It was both kitchen and preservation station, probably also where you'd hang your wet cloak after a long day. Now here's something fun to chew on. Some archaeologists believe Viking food might have actually tasted better in winter, precisely because it was so heavily seasoned, smoked, or fermented. It was intense, pungent, bold. Not everyone's cup of mead, but it was anything but bland. You reach for another piece of rye, thick with seeds and sharp from the sourdough culture that's been passed down through generations. Someone used hazelnut flour in the mix. It's dense, nutty, a little chewy, and unexpectedly delicious. Outside, the wind howls like it's trying to join you by the fire, but inside, you're full, warm, and maybe even grateful for this ancient version of meal prep. And you realize, nothing here is wasted. Every rind, bone, and root scrap has a second life. Boiled into broth, dried into feed, or packed into clay for later. The Viking approach to food wasn't just survival, it was strategy. You lick the salt from your fingers, lean back against the wall, and smile. In a world of frostbite, wolf tracks, and the occasional neighboring raid, this humble jar of pickled turnips starts to feel like treasure. Spring arrives not with a bang, but with a soggy squelch. Snowdrifts collapse into gray slush, and icy puddles appear like trapdoors beneath your feet. You step out of the longhouse and immediately regret it. Your boots are soaked through in minutes. But no matter. The land is waking up, and that means one thing. It's gathering season. After months of gnawing dried fish and fermented horror meat, the Vikings were ready. Desperate, even, for something green. And this time of year, you become a forager. A hunter, yes, but not with spears or bows. You hunt with your hands, your nose, your instincts. And let's be real, with the help of people who know way more about plants than you do, most often Viking women. Today, your quarry includes nettles, sorrel, wild garlic, and goosefoot. All greens that shoot up with the first thaw, tender and sharp, like spring itself. You crouch by a muddy slope and tear off a handful of young dandelion leaves. Bitter, yes, but full of nutrients. Your body practically sighs with relief at the taste of chlorophyll after a winter of salt and smoke. Back at camp, someone's already preparing spring soup, a thin broth made from preserved bone stock into which all these wild greens are tossed. There's a chunk of dried fish in there too, and the smell is, surprisingly, not awful. It's like drinking a swamp, but in a comforting way. Mainstream fact for today, Vikings relied heavily on wild foraging. While their farms produced staples, the true variety in their diet came from the woods and fields, seasonal gifts that shifted monthly, even weekly. Certain greens like celandine or lamb's quarters were highly prized for their flavor and medicinal uses. And here's the fun fringe detail. Some Viking sagas mention elf mushrooms, possibly a reference to hallucinogenic fungi like Amanita muscaria. While there's still debate over whether these were eaten recreationally or ritually, or even at all, some historians argue they were part of specific shamanic or berserker practices. Personally, you decide to skip the mushroom roulette today. You wander further from the farmstead, a leather pouch bouncing at your side. Soon it's half full of wild strawberries, tiny and sweet. A rare find this early and worth guarding. You share a few with a barefoot child who offers you a handful of young spruce tips in return. Chewy, citrusy, and loaded with vitamin C, they're basically Viking gummy bears. Not everything you gather is for food. Some herbs, yarrow, meadowsweet, mugwort, are destined for the healer's pouch, steeped into teas or packed into wounds. A few might make their way into food too, doubling as seasoning. Viking cuisine didn't use spices the way we do, but it wasn't bland. They had mustard seeds, horseradish, juniper, angelica, and a whole host of other flavor boosters pulled straight from nature. You head back as the sun dips low and birds trill in the birch trees. Inside the longhouse, a pot bubbles gently over the fire. Someone's added fresh green shoots to yesterday's barley gruel, transforming it from gray mush into something vaguely hopeful. You chew slowly, the taste somewhere between spinach and radish. It's not glamorous, but it's alive. You notice a bundle of ramsons, wild garlic, hanging to dry near the rafters. These will be used in nearly everything for the next few weeks. Flatbreads, meat stews, maybe even cheese. Their pungent aroma cuts through the longhouse funk like a culinary lightning bolt. Garlic breath? Worth it. The community feels lighter today, too. Kids chase each other with sticks, someone's singing an off-key tune while mending a cloak, and the goats seem slightly less furious. It's amazing what a handful of green can do for morale. Quirky note, there's evidence that Vikings brewed beer flavored with bog myrtle, a herbaceous shrub with a bitter, almost sage-like flavor. It was likely foraged during this same season and might have also helped preserve the brew. Some even believe it had mild psychoactive effects, just enough to make a cold evening feel warmer or a bad stew feel less bad. One elderly woman hands you a flat cake of cat-tail root flour, dried and rehydrated into something vaguely pancake-like. You bite into it. It's earthy, fibrous, oddly sweet. Not bad, actually. She tells you it's from the marsh beyond the hill, cattails pulled, dried, ground by hand. An entire meal from plants that most people today would walk right past. That's the magic of this season. It's not about abundance. It's about possibility. You start to see food everywhere, in buds, bark, flowers, moss. The Vikings weren't just warriors or sailors. They were scavengers, alchemists, improvisers. Survival here meant knowing that the first few weeks after the thaw were the most fragile. No fresh harvest yet, and the winter stores nearly gone. If you didn't gather well now, you might not last until summer. As you finish your last spoonful of soup, light green herbal, you realize something strange. You don't miss the meat. You don't miss the smoke. You don't even miss the bread. This meal, with its bitter herbs and grassy broth, tastes like hope. Your hands are still stained green from yesterday's gathering when someone calls you over. There's a new smell in the air, thick and acrid and unmistakable. Smoke, but with a tang of salt and fish oil. You follow the scent, and there it is. Today's project: fish preservation. On a flat stretch of rocky ground, several slabs of cod and herring glisten in the morning sun. They've been split down the middle and stretched wide like grim little butterflies, pinned to racks and already crawling with flies. You grimace. Then you notice the smokehouse beside them, a squat wooden structure from which coils a steady stream of grayish vapor. The door creaks open, and a gust of warm, briny air smacks you in the face. Inside, fish hang from the rafters, their flesh turning amber as smoke curls around them. Someone tosses another armload of dried seaweed and driftwood onto the embers, an old trick that gives the fish a subtle flavor and helps keep the pests away. It's humid, it's pungent, and yes, it's kind of amazing. You're hungry again. This is your first proper introduction to hardfisker, a Viking staple that's essentially jerky made from sea creatures. The fish is air-dried or cold-smoked until it reaches a state that can only be described as prehistorically chewy. You're handed a piece and told to bash it with a hammer first. Yes, really. Then gnaw it like a rawhide bone. It tastes like salt, effort, and an oddly pleasant oily finish. You approve. Mainstream fact of the day: fish was a cornerstone of the Viking diet, especially in coastal settlements. Cod, herring, haddock, even salmon when they could get it. Preservation was key, not just for winter, but for long sea voyages where fresh food would rot fast. Fish, once dried, could last for months. But the process wasn't just practical, it was ritual. Many communities believed that the smoke purified the spirit of the fish. Some even placed protective runes on their drying racks, worried that evil spirits might sour the batch. It sounds superstitious, until you remember this stuff was life and death. You step outside and join a few others scraping salt onto another pile of fillets. Salt's rare and expensive, so they're using it sparingly. The real preservative is wind and time, though some wealthier farms had access to underground pits lined with seawater brine, almost like proto-refrigerators. Historians still argue whether these techniques were widespread or reserved for coastal elites. Nearby, a different group is dealing with shellfish, picking limpets, winkles, and mussels from buckets of seawater. Someone jokes that this is Viking sushi, though none of it is eaten raw. Instead, it's thrown into a pot with some seaweed and boiled until the smell attracts every cat within a mile radius. You help ladle it out later, and the broth is briny and rich, like drinking a tide pool. You slurp happily, spitting out occasional bits of grit. Then there's the fish liver oil. Oh, yes. Vikings didn't waste a single part of their catch. Livers were boiled down into an oily golden substance that was either drunk for health, gross but effective, or used as lamp fuel. You're offered a spoonful. It tastes like seawater and pennies. You politely decline the second serving. Fringe fact for the day: there are saga references to rotted skate being served during festivals, possibly an early version of Iceland's notorious hakarl, which involves fermenting shark meat until it reeks of ammonia. Did the Vikings actually eat this? Historians still debate it, though one whiff of your neighbor's breath suggests someone here definitely did. You notice a small side project: fish glue production. Boiling down skins and bones creates an adhesive used for everything from woodworking to waterproofing. The pot smells like sadness, but the results are strangely useful. It's another reminder that in Viking culture, nothing was wasted. Every fish scale had a purpose. After dinner, which is, surprise, more fish, you sit near the shore and watch the boats coming in. Rowers chant softly, nets sag with fresh catch, and seagulls wheel above, hoping for scraps. You lean back against a salt-crusted barrel and think about how tied to the sea these people were. Even those who didn't sail relied on the ocean's generosity, for food, for trade, for survival. The wind smells like smoke and seaweed now, and you find it oddly comforting. That morning's smoked herring still lingers in your teeth, and your shirt smells like cod. But hey, you've had worse days. You wake before dawn to the sharp crack of hooves on frozen earth. There's commotion near the longhouse. A boar's been caught, and not just any boar. This one's massive, bristly, and steaming from the hunt. You shuffle out still half asleep, greeted by the sight of triumphant hunters dragging it through the snow, blood trailing like a grim ribbon. Meat is on the menu today, and not just scraps. A few villagers are already sharpening knives and prepping the fire pit. Someone hands you a large flat stone for grinding herbs, though calling what you have herbs might be generous. It's mostly wild garlic, dried angelica, and fistfuls of gritty moss. The point isn't taste, it's ceremony. Feasting in Viking culture isn't just about food. It's about social order, politics, and sometimes even spiritual warfare. Today, the meat is sacred. You hear someone mutter about Frey, god of fertility and harvest, who loves a good boar roast. The oldest woman in the village touches her fingers to the boar's forehead before they begin, whispering words you can't quite make out. Mainstream fact of the day: Vikings prized pork highly. Pigs were easier to raise than cattle, and they grew fat on kitchen scraps and forest forage. They also reproduced fast. Important when your winters can be 9 months long. Boars in particular were sacrificed during Yule feasts, both to honor gods and to ensure future bounty. You help skewer the choicest cuts, haunch, belly, even the organs, and suspend them over an open pit. The fat sizzles, and soon you're half mesmerized by the rhythmic drip of grease into fire. Someone drops onions into the embers, and they char into soft, sweet clumps of flavor. You're salivating already. But not all of the boar will be roasted. Some is being cured in salt mixed with ground kelp, another part buried in a clay-lined pit with smoking embers to slow cook overnight. It's clever, low-tech sous vide, Viking style. You wander into the longhouse to prep the side dishes. Barley porridge thickened with goat's milk bubbles gently in the hearth. Dried apples rehydrated in honeyed water sit off to the side. A few lucky folks nibble on blood sausage made with leftover boar blood, oats, and herbs. It's intense but undeniably rich. Fringe tidbit time. A few sagas describe warriors eating bear meat before battle, believing it would imbue them with the animal's rage and strength. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or literary flourish. Either way, your hosts have thoughts. One man pulls you aside and tells you that eating bear liver will make your spirit too heavy and turn your dreams black. Duly noted. Back outside, the meat is nearly done. The smell is dizzying: fat, smoke, spice, and glory. You get your first bite: crisped boar skin that crunches like a kettle chip, followed by soft, fatty meat that practically melts on your tongue. You grunt. It's primal and perfect. No sauce needed, no plate either. The feast begins with a toast. Horns are raised, some filled with ale brewed from barley and juniper, others with mead sweetened with heather honey. You're given a cup and told to drink deep for the gods in the gut. You do, and it tastes like fire and flowers. Then the storytelling begins. One man rises and speaks of the hunt, dramatizing every step until the children are wide-eyed and the adults are laughing. Another recounts a myth: Odin tricking a giant for a taste of divine meat. The words roll like thunder, deep and ancient. It's not just dinner, it's theater. Someone stands and shouts about honor. Another slams their cup in challenge. But the tension dissolves into song. You don't understand the lyrics, but you hum along anyway. Smoke curls toward the beams, and the shadows seem to dance with the rhythm. You notice something odd. In the far corner, away from the fire, smaller portions are left on wooden trays, quietly placed with no fanfare. An offering, maybe? You remember being told spirits are always watching. Better to stay on their good side. Historians still debate how literal these rituals were. Were the offerings for gods, ancestors, or simply tradition? By the time the feast winds down, you're full beyond belief, cradling your belly and wondering how the Vikings didn't just nap for a week after meals like this. A final round of mead is passed around, and the embers glow red and low. Later, you lie on a fur-lined bench, still tasting boar and smoke. Your head swims with warmth and rhythm. In this moment, the line between history and myth blurs. You feel like a part of something old, vast, and very well fed. You sleep like a stone after the boar feast, so deeply, in fact, that you almost miss the clatter of wooden pails and the low chants outside. It's still dark, but people are moving about with intention. Today is trading day, a welcome break from root stew monotony and your chance to experience a Viking market. You follow the crowd along a frozen path toward a small coastal dock. The harbor is rimmed with ice, but a few sleek, shallow draft boats bob stubbornly in the water. These are no grand warships, just merchant vessels, packed tight with barrels, baskets, and fur-wrapped bundles. As the sun crests low and red on the horizon, the air fills with the sweet earthy tang of spices? Yes, faint but unmistakable. There's cinnamon, or something like it, and a distant note of dried citrus peel. And that's your first clue. Viking cuisine didn't live in total isolation. Mainstream fact incoming. The Viking Age saw an enormous web of trade, stretching from the British Isles to the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic caliphates. Goods flowed through rivers, overland paths, and sea routes, and with them came ideas and flavor. At the market, you see sacks of dried fish, mostly cod and herring. A few traders unroll waxy cloth bundles containing salted lamb, butter wrapped in birch bark, and hard cheeses shaped like wagon wheels. Then there's the bling. Nuts. Not gold. Not jewels. Actual nuts, hazelnuts from the south, prized for their rarity and shelf life. They might as well be treasure. You drift past a man selling a fermented shark head, and when you recoil, he winks and mutters something about acquired taste. You believe him. You're pretty sure it's acquired after several lifetimes. Quirky tidbit time. Some Vikings brought home peacocks from raids. Historians still argue whether they were meant as exotic meals or just weird status symbols. Either way, you wouldn't want to pluck one. But here's what grabs you next. Imports. A cloth-wrapped brick of dried ginger, a tiny bag of black peppercorns, and even a cloudy vial of olive oil. It's wildly expensive and smells like travel. A well-off woman beside you trades 4 pelts and a chunk of amber just for the right to drizzle it on her cheese. Worth it? She seems to think so. The barter continues. Someone trades mead for beeswax. Someone else swaps walrus ivory for jars of honey. You step closer to a group gathered around a hot stone, where a merchant from the south is grilling something thin and brown. A slice is offered to you on a stick. It's flatbread, shockingly spiced and layered with dried meat and maybe fig. You take a bite and taste the outside world. One old trader shows off a Byzantine coin worn thin with handling. You can't eat it, he shrugs, but it got me saffron once. You nod solemnly, as if this is a conversation you've had many times. You haven't, of course, but pretending is half the Viking game. Near the edge of the dock, you help unload sacks of grain that smell foreign. Spelt, maybe, or something close. The merchant boasts it grew in warmer lands, where winters are short and bread rises tall. You picture bread that doesn't resemble damp rocks and briefly consider defecting. But Viking creativity lies in making do. One woman proudly shows off her dried seaweed crisps, toasted on hot stones and seasoned with wild herbs. They're crunchy, oddly good, and definitely nutritious, high in iodine, she claims, which probably means nothing to you, but sounds important. Back at the Longhouse, the new ingredients are tucked away like treasure. The peppercorns are sealed in a horn flask. The ginger is sliced wafer thin and soaked in honey, becoming something between candy and cure-all. You're given one sliver to taste, and it sets your mouth ablaze. In a good way. And the olive oil? That's being saved for something special. Maybe the next feast. Maybe the Jarl's birthday. Maybe never. It's too rare to risk casually. You end the day wrapped in your cloak, sitting beside a young boy who's gnawing on a smoked fishtail and watching the horizon like it owes him something. He hands you a dried apple slice, sticky with syrup, and you both chew in silence. The fire crackles, the wind hums low, and somewhere inside you, a realization curls warm and solid. Viking food isn't just dirt and broth. It's trade, invention, and ambition, tied together with the fierce joy of surviving another winter, another storm, another day. Word count, awaiting. By now, you've chewed your way through enough dried fish to qualify as part seal. But tonight is different. There's a strange hum in the Longhouse, a festive buzz, and not just from the mead. Someone has something new to show. A food experiment. Yes, even Vikings like to get a little wild in the kitchen now and then. You edge closer to the hearth, where a few daring souls have gathered around a carved wooden bowl. Inside is a pale, gelatinous mass that quivers when the light hits it just right. It looks like something between yogurt and regret. A woman scoops a bit onto a spoon, offers it to you, and says, "Clabbered milk with ash salt." You try to smile. You fail. Still, you taste it, and it's not terrible. Sour, yes, creamy. The ash salt is earthy, like licking a Viking boot, but somehow it works. This, you realize, is the heart of Viking cuisine. Turn what little you have into something just edible enough to impress your neighbors. Here's a mainstream fact for you. The Vikings weren't just raiders. They were incredible preservers. They had to be. Winter was long and markets were far, so they fermented, smoked, salted, dried, soured, and pickled almost everything. Fish hanging in wind-curing sheds, turnips buried in the ground, eggs stored in lye, even meat buried underground to ferment for months. Though, fair warning, you're not ready for that smell. And yes, quirky tidbit, some Viking Age people believed fermented bear meat gave you strength in battle, but only if you didn't vomit first. Historians still argue whether these buried meats were regular fare or wild dares gone wrong. Either way, someone always brought them out at parties. Tonight, the experimental dishes keep coming. One man proudly slices a loaf of seaweed bread, dense, dark, and flecked with green. He's added a handful of roasted grains for crunch and a smear of berry paste on top. It's for digestion, he claims. You suspect it's actually just to cover the flavor. Next comes a boiled pudding of blood and barley, wrapped in a sheep's stomach. A primitive haggis, really. You try a small bite. It's iron-rich and chewy, but it fills you in a comforting, deeply ancestral way, like something your DNA was expecting all along. The real crowd pleaser, though, is something called sun cheese. It's a soft, spreadable curd, aged in warm air and flavored with thyme, paired with a sliver of roasted walnut and a drizzle of honey. Honestly, it slaps. You take seconds, then thirds. There's laughter now, even a little music. Someone's clapping a rhythm on an overturned tub while another plucks a tune on a lyre. The kids are outside, playing tag around a fish-drying rack, which sounds like a health hazard, but apparently builds character. You sit back against a timber post, full and dizzy with flavor. Not just from the food, but from the effort. You watch them forage, trade, preserve, invent. Viking cooking wasn't passive. It was active survival, elevated to an art form through necessity. Even the weird stuff, the clabbered milk, the seaweed paste, the dried reindeer heart, it all had purpose. It all meant something. A woman leans over to refill your horn cup with warm birch sap mead. It's sweet and slightly fizzy. You raise it, toast her, and take a sip. It tastes like spring. Another joke flies across the fire, something about someone's turnip looking like a troll's backside. You don't catch all of it, but you laugh anyway. You're in it now. One of the clan, the outsider who ate the weird jelly and lived to tell the tale. And while everyone's distracted, a younger boy sneaks you a chunk of something wrapped in beeswax cloth. Don't tell, he whispers. Inside? A chunk of crystallized honey and dried apple, pressed together into a makeshift Viking candy. You grin like an idiot. He grins back. The fire dims a little. A cold wind whistles through the roof slats. You pull your cloak tighter and close your eyes, belly round, tongue still tingling from birch and ash and salt and thyme. And in that moment, you understand. Viking food was never just food. It was family, ingenuity, pride, and rebellion. Wrapped in bark, buried in ice, stirred into stew. The feast wasn't just the end of the day. It was why you made it through the day. The next morning, to a clatter of hooves and the smoky scent of an early fire. Outside, dew clings to everything. The grass, the thatch, the wool of your cloak. You stretch, creaking like a ship's hull, and your stomach rumbles. A final Viking breakfast awaits. What's on the menu? Porridge. Again, but this time it's luxury porridge, if such a thing can exist. The cook, an older man with hands like cracked stone, is stirring a thick pot of barley and flaxseed, sweetened with a bit of leftover mead and a sprinkle of crushed hazelnuts. On top, dried pear slices, chewy and golden from being hung above the hearth for weeks. You take a seat on a wooden bench that wobbles slightly. Someone hands you a bowl. The porridge sticks to the spoon like wet cement, but it smells rich, nutty, comforting. You take a bite. Warmth floods your chest. This is Viking comfort food, slow, hearty, and quietly clever. As you eat, two women sit nearby, gossiping over a bundle of herbs. They're making elagrun, a spiced tonic of yarrow, honey, and crushed berries, boiled for strength and longevity. Tastes like licking a forest floor, one says, grinning. You try it. She's not wrong. It strikes you how deeply interwoven food and health were in this world. Food wasn't just fuel. It was medicine. Mint for the stomach, angelica root for warding off illness, garlic for strength. Even the smoky soot that coated everything was believed to have purifying power, which you try not to think too hard about. Nearby, a small boy chews on a sliver of dried fish skin, like it's candy. His sister offers him a bite of dried sea buckthorn, sharp, citrusy, full of vitamin C. The idea of a Viking multivitamin comes to mind, and you chuckle. Mainstream fact time. Archaeological finds in Viking graves and settlements reveal not just the expected bones and tools, but kitchen gear galore, griddles, fermentation vats, strainers, ladles. They took their food seriously. And while they didn't have cookbooks, food knowledge was passed down orally, generation to generation. Quirky tidbit? Some Viking Age households used hollowed out animal horns, not just for drinking, but for storing porridge, like a thermos, but significantly more alarming to drop on your foot. Historians still argue whether the Viking diet was mostly peasant slop or a surprisingly balanced affair. The answer is both. Depending on the season, the storm, or the political mood, you might eat like a king, or like someone who'd kill for half a turnip. By midday, the village is abuzz. Word spreads of a trade boat coming up the fjord. Excitement crackles in the air. You tag along as everyone hustles toward the docks, baskets in hand. The boat, low and sleek, is already mooring when you arrive. From it comes a bounty of strange new goods, dried plums from Francia, sacks of rye flour, almonds, even a tiny pouch of cinnamon. Yes, cinnamon. In a Viking village. It wasn't common, but every so often, thanks to their vast trade networks, the Vikings got their hands on spices. The rarest treats, saffron, cumin, black pepper, were treasured like gold. Tonight's stew might just get a dusting of imported spice, assuming no one hoards it all first. You offer to help unload and get rewarded with a flat cake, baked in a boat oven, still warm. It's thin, crispy, made from rye and crushed peas, and brushed with a light coating of goose fat. You eat it in 4 bites. And now, full circle. Back at the longhouse, back at the hearth. The same smells, same hands, same fire. But you feel changed. Not because the food was fancy, it wasn't, but because it was real, honest, built to last. The Vikings didn't eat to show off. They ate to survive, to strengthen, to remember the land and love the gods and fuel the next voyage. Whether it was porridge or pickled herring or seaweed gruel, it was part of a whole, living rhythm. Someone's calling for you. There's supper to stir. You grab the wooden spoon, step to the pot, and give it a swirl. Whatever's inside smells vaguely of lamb and lichen. You inhale deeply. You belong here now. And now, as the fire dims low and the longhouse softens to a hush, you lean back against the fur-lined wall and close your eyes. The warmth of barley still lingers in your belly. Outside, the wind hums across the fjord like a lullaby, and somewhere in the dark, a goat sneezes. You smile. Life here isn't quiet, but it is steady, simple, grounded. You've harvested turnips in the rain, dried fish on a rope, learned to sip sour milk without flinching. Well, mostly. You've watched grain become bread, cabbage become kraut, bones become broth. You've held the past in your hands, and it wasn't made of stone or scrolls, but spoonfuls, salted skin, and smoke-laced air. As the longhouse breathes around you, its timbers creaking gently in the wind, you begin to feel how food, in all its humble forms, connected the Vikings to the earth beneath their feet and the sky above their sails. Every meal was a memory. Every dish a kind of quiet ritual. Your breath slows. Your muscles loosen. You sink just a little deeper into the straw mat below, letting the sounds of crackling embers and soft snoring lull you. The journey is ending, but the flavors, the textures, the quiet rhythms, they'll follow you, drifting behind your dreams like the scent of baking rye. Sleep well, little Viking. You've earned your rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.